Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the exploration and cultivation of the outside genius found in neurodivergence.
Hello, fellow multi-potentialites. Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast. My name is Lillian Skinner. Today we're going to talk about what it means to be a multi-potentialite and what drives it. And you'll never guess what it is. It's spatial giftedness. That's pretty much what drives all of this stuff. I started out with, are you a gifted neurodivergent? And then we moved to, are you a savant? And this is what that boils down to. Spatial giftedness is what drives multi-potentiality, savant giftedness. Every gifted person is a neurodivergent, and every neurodivergent is probably gifted. Whether or not they can realize that full giftedness into actual world way of seeing, that is a part that we struggle with. And that is why I am doing my podcast, because I think that we have all been set up for failure as creatives so that they can pluck out the Kafkas of the world, where we pick out people who cried while they did their art, while they worked as an insurance agent, and they barely got anything out there, but it was so good, and he dies very young. I mean, come on, that is our potential. That's what our society is set up to do. It's set up to just wring out the emotions, and unless you're rich and come from a wealthy family, you are never going to be a famous artist. You're never going to be Andy Warhol, who basically took things other people did and then put them in a different light. I'm really sorry to say, but he's not really one of the great creatives. He's not a savant. He's just a guy who's rich, who had a bravado because he grew up being told that he was special and he was a creative and he got to be able to do it. The truth is, most people who are creatives live horrible lives. And I grew up in a family of people like that. They are miserable. They're miserable because our world does not educate the creatives. It does not teach you how to go out into the world and go living on your own. And now we're all going to have to do that. We're all going to have to figure out a new way of making our living. And this is why I'm doing this podcast, because I am in the process of literally doing that. I already did it in a technical space. I already did it with my children. But right now I'm actually creating a new way of seeing and being that is created for those of us who are most creative. We are the gifted neurodivergents, and we are the most creative. And I'll guarantee you that those stories of this kid who has mental limitations or whatever they want to call them, and then they turn out to be an amazing painter, they're not limitations. They're just different ways of being and seeing. They're the outliers. You're an outlier. The more outlier, more neurodivergent, the more creative you are, the harder it is to move into this world, because this world is set up for 2D, and all creatives are multidimensional thinkers. They're multi-potentialites because their ability to learn on their own is that high. Average people are not great at learning on their own. Gifted neurodivergents are fantastic at learning on their own. The world teaches us. We figure it out ourselves. And that's why we weave beautiful, complex patterns that are unique to each one of us. And we see them because our brain is weaving them. We bring them in with our different sensing, our higher sensing. Those of us who have some higher sensing in some areas, most of us are not even. Only people who are technically in the middle, who are average, would have an average sense of sensing that comes in, and there isn't one in particular that's stronger. But I was just talking to somebody today, and they were saying, oh, I'm definitely a visual person. Definitely I process visually. I did really well in the school system because I'm visual, but on the flip side, looking at things brings me an intense amount of emotion. And I was like, this makes perfect sense. And we were talking about how she lived in the woods, and a bunch of the big trees that had surrounded her house had fallen down in a storm, and she was mourning the loss of them. She said, they're now leaving a big open space in the landscape. The shade isn't on my windows. I can't see those tree branches. I feel sad about that. But then I also realized that my brain is saying, hey, it's not all that bad. We have now less risk to the house, and you can plant new trees. There's our emotion side and our logic side coming up and trying to negotiate the world, and you follow down the middle. You have all of this sensing data coming in, and you're like, why do I feel so emotional? And she and I have been working together for a while. So she was like, oh, I'm feeling emotional because it's coming in because I'm so visual. And it's fascinating when you learn the way you're supposed to be. We are not messed up. We don't need to be a different way. What we actually need to do right now is figure out who and what we are, because the world is changing to our side of being. We are going to be helping everyone else be what they naturally are. We are the creatives, and the creatives create a new way of seeing and doing and being. And right now, we really, really need that. If you're a small picture savant or a small picture gifted neurodivergent, you don't struggle quite as much as the big pictures, because the world is actually set up for small picture. If you're a gifted multi-potentialite, but you're a small picture multi-potentialite, you're actually doing well. You're going to go into different classrooms. You're going to have those small pictures. You're going to get 2D, and then you're going to expand it a little bit on your own. And you look great in this world. But if you're a big picture multi-potentialite, you are constantly being told that you need to focus on things you don't want to do. I saw an article on my LinkedIn post, and I'll post this link up for you too, but they were going on and on about how our brain rewards learning. Is this a new concept? I want to cry right now that they think that our brain wouldn't be set up to learn, because how the heck would we learn as a species? Of course your brain rewards learning. It's called play. Animals do it. The people do it. I can't believe that we are coming through a revelation that our brains might be intrinsically motivated to learn. This extrinsic thing is a bunch of crap that they pushed on us, and we all know that if you're creative, you're mourning the loss of your ability to intrinsically learn. But now we're going to actually need to do that, and children are the first people that get this opportunity. My middle kid and I are homeschooling again. I homeschool them all at different times. I've only had 2 of them at home, not all 3, because there's a big gap between them, but also because I get overwhelmed having them too much home. I really like to do it one-on-one, and I have to work as well. So by having one child home at a time for homeschooling, the one that's in school system, she right now and he right now, I made sure they're in the parts they want. They're getting to pick where they're going. They're taught in a way that's good and helps them understand the system, but also doesn't repress them. My oldest in college, my youngest is in Montessori. My middle one is going to be in college and homeschool. They did not do well in the system, but they do great in hybrid. They do great when they're able to just control their own way of learning. This is how the future will be, though. We are going to have so much information available to us. We're going to have so much ability to manipulate that information and not have to worry about like the grammar side and the details and all that perfectionism. Because one of the things I keep saying is how much we are multi-perspective people. Multi-potentialite is a multiple perspective people. It means you can see different ways of looking at each thing. And so you're interested in each thing because there's like, oh, I can see all the different ways of understanding this. And you go into it and you teach yourself. When you go into the school system, though, we all pretend that it's 2D and it's one perspective. It's the average perspective. That is harder. As I talked about last week, it is harder. The further you are from the average IQ, the more perspectives you see, the harder it is for you to constantly be in that state. Now, the school system is somewhat valuable to me because I don't know what average is, but it still was never giving me quite the information I needed. And I will say AI has fixed that for me. I know what average is. I can look up right now what the heck the average sees multi-potentialite as, and then I can counter it. It's super awesome for me because I struggled for a long, long time trying to figure out what the heck average saw as multi-potentialite. I had to do so much research to try to dig out what I actually wanted to know so I knew where I was at. And then when AI came out, it's like, oh, I just ask it a question and it tells me what average people see. And I got to tell you, it's wrong again, because again, this is from a bottom-up perspective and it's from a outside to in. The creatives are not in the system. The most creative people have been shoved out. They're lost. They're kind of floating around. Some of them are really emotionally broken, but the most creative people have to figure out a way. Otherwise, their brain is just in sadness and depression. And if you are one of these people, $200 says you're just a creative and you're in the wrong space. We are depressed when we're not doing what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be creating. We're supposed to be making brand new ways of seeing and doing and being. And if you're not doing that, and that's what you're meant to be, yeah, your body is like, I hate this. I hate life. And getting out of the system is really hard. But now is the greatest chance in your life of doing that because the system's breaking down. And the only way we're going to survive what is coming, the constant change, is if we are in touch with ourselves and we know how to create, we know how to anticipate, and we are going into what it is to be a multi-potentialite creative genius. You have that potential. If you're listening to this podcast and this is speaking to you at all, you have the potential for creative genius. All you need to do is not be conditioned out of it. We come out of the womb creative genius. We go into kindergarten with some creative genius, unless we've been in preschool too long and we've beaten it out of us. But when I went into kindergarten, I didn't go to preschool. I had all of that and it was immediately like squashed. It was like, nope, you will not do your own thing. Nope. You will not be a person who gets to decide what they want to be. Now, I did come from a very controlling parent set, so I had already experienced that, but my parents still liked to do creative things. So they had this extreme control, and then we had this, let's do something creative every day. I am a creative intellectual, but when I hit the school system, I was not allowed to be a creative intellectual. So I had a lot of depression. I had a lot of struggles, a lot of frustration, a lot of like, what the heck is going on here, before I finally realized this is all set up against me. This has always been set up against me, and this is always going to be set up against us unless we start knowing ourselves and we start creating our own world and ways of being. Our way of being is the one that will be the most successful when change is the new constant. We are not going to have environmental stability. We're not going to have government stability. We're not going to have a lot of stability. So we have to learn to connect with ourselves, and we have to learn to trust ourselves. I sit in front of people every day who have been stripped of their self-trust. I don't know why I was able to get mine. I think probably because I was in such extremes and I had parents who were such extremes that I knew that I couldn't trust what they were saying. And I'll give you an example. When I was a kid, my dad, I asked him, is the president the person who writes all their speeches? Like, how does one person do all of the things that they're doing? And my father told me that the president was a very special person who had all these abilities and they were superior to us, like they were some demigod. And I was really little. My dad has a really weird view of the world, but he honestly believes that there's people that are superhuman, and those are the people that our system holds up. I struggled with that. My whole life, I've been walking around looking to understand what made somebody who was in power so special, what made them so brilliant. And then I went into the world and I realized, yeah, they're not that smart. They're not that brilliant. They're not that special. It's just the system is set up to service them, and they have money and power. That's the difference. I have been in so many situations where I have been very clear about what the best situation is and just told to shut up, sit down, and be quiet, that I don't know what I'm talking about. And then it goes down exactly like I said, kind of tired of that. I'm kind of tired of the one who understands and sees the big picture and sees how things are going to come out. And I'm always told, I don't know what I'm talking about. They have raised the science and technology people, and then we ask their opinion on how the humanities work. And of course, they think it's magic, just like I think the ability for you to do math all day is magic, because my brain gets really tired doing math. I don't enjoy it. I went to school for it. I got a degree in it. I don't enjoy it. I love that my one child is so into it and that she'll sit there and understand it. I love that she'll learn to apply it. I am doing the exact same thing as far as people go, but it's not fun for me to do it in the math and sciences. So when I see people who are math and science oriented talking about how humans move through the world, how they pattern seek, how they can see the patterns, how they have these like supernatural abilities, I just think, no, this is not your space. You should not be here. This is my space. This is those people who are like me, people who actually thrive on understanding how other people move through the world, how they themselves move through the world, who have a natural giftedness for understanding humanity. We are not in the system. We have been pushed out. We have been lied to and told we don't know what we're talking about. And we've been called mystics and magical and witches, but we're not that. We're simply high sensing individuals who have giftedness in a way that our system doesn't want us to present, doesn't want us to use, because then we would undermine the structure and the messages and that average being the ideal and the only way of being that the system has put in place. We can see very clearly that this is our pattern abilities. This is our creative genius. This is the intelligence that we have at our high sensing level, reasoning brain and my sensing brain, that are constantly duking it out for what is my reality in the world. Mine duke it out very loudly, very clearly, and always come up with an answer for me. When I was in the system, I did struggle to have them connect. And then once I got out and I was allowed to be what I was, peace came. Peace and genius came. And everything came so clear to me. And I can just see exactly how our spatial giftedness drives our neurodivergence, drives our creativity, drives everything as we move through the world. What allowed me to get there is my multi-potentiality and the space I got when I had to homeschool, when I had to go back through my life and look at all these things and realize, you know what? They taught me wrong. Let's figure this out. Let's start anew. Let's have no expectations, no preconceived idea, and let's move forward by experimenting. This is what being creative is. Creative is about you saying, I'm going to figure this out myself. I'm not going to use everybody else's stuff and go on their way. I'm going to use it as an example, maybe as a reference, but not as the be-all, end-all. I'm going to figure it out myself. And it doesn't matter if you're doing art. It doesn't matter if you're doing music. It doesn't matter if you're doing science. It doesn't matter if you're doing math, English, what have you. All of that, the genius of creativity is you figuring it out yourself. the idea that you have to develop all these skills and you have to do it in this certain pattern, that certain pattern is completely wrong. It is in you to figure this out. All you need to do is be around people like you to gut check with. I go out into the world, and I started this essentially so I could have people to gut check with. I sit in so many different meetings, so many different types of groups and settings, and I'm regularly disappointed because they just can't think outside the box. And I think, where are the other outside the box thinkers? I need them. So I've started this podcast to bring them to me, and it is working. People are coming to me. You might totally disagree, and I want to hear your perspective because I will grow if you tell me how I'm wrong. I will grow if you tell me how I'm right. I will always grow. So feedback is appreciated. What I'm trying to say is that we have so much out there that's saying, oh, this is the future, this is how you do it, but it's all trying to keep you in the box that is our system. Our system is falling apart. The box is degrading. It's disintegrating. I guess that box is actually biodegradable. That's good. And as a result, we're in a new space. The New Smart is a book that I think we should all go get a copy of. This is by Terry Roberts, PhD, and it's The New Smart, How Nurturing Creativity Will Help Children Thrive. This book is wonderful because it really does bring together Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. It talks about how our history or our future will look as we promote creativity over the regurgitation, and how the new creative class will trump the old intellectual class. He does a really nice job of laying out a case for what I've been talking about, and I think you should all get a book. I think that he doesn't do a great job of is really understanding creatives. He obviously is not a creative because he has all these processes and ways for you to stay in the system and become creative. And I disagree. The truth is you were born creative. You actually will find more and greater creativity outside of the system. Also, the system is breaking down, but he doesn't really go into it to the level that it is now apparent it is breaking down and it will collapse. He is not talking in that manner. He doesn't recognize that. And so I think you should read his book, and it will make you feel so much better because it will be an intermediary between where I'm at and where the rest of the world is at. He really does a great job, and this helped me immensely when I started my journey 10 years ago. I think that I read this book and thought, oh my gosh, thank you so much. This is what I need. But he is not realistic over the future we're facing with the ecological disasters. They talk about cycles and being creative. You know what? You're born creative. You really actually don't need anything to get back to it other than probably a break. When you homeschool a child or you unschool a child, they talk about 6 months where you have to let that child unschool. Your child will play video games for 6 months. Yeah, mine did. Mine didn't play for 6 months, but it was like a good 3 months where they played a whole lot of video games. And you know what? She still went up 4 grades at the end of the 6 months. I can put nothing on these kids and they'll learn. They'll still develop and grow. They grow faster than when they're in the school system. That is a crime. My point is that you are already there. All you need to do is be unconditioned from the conditioning you have. I think I'm going to start a place where we do that because we will need to be unconditioning in this world. What I am trying to do is uncondition you while you're still in the system. Maybe in the future, I will have to set up a place where I uncondition you so you can find your creative genius, so you can survive and thrive. In change, we thrive. In change, we will survive. And there's a lot coming. I don't know if you've looked at the horrible news about Antarctica and the Arctic, how horrible it is melting, how bad it is, how basically the Arctic will become a heat sink. They're looking at 25 to 50 years speed up on the CO2 levels coming out. Now, I see things on LinkedIn. Some of them are very 2D. I saw somebody saying, well, trees take in CO2, so we just need trees. It's like, yes, we do, but we've cut most of them down. I don't think people understand the full depth of the problem. The problem is that everything we need to counteract what's going to happen naturally, we've destroyed ecologically by our economy, because our economy is such a voracious appetite. We have actually taken from the future. We stole from Peter to pay Paul. I know you know that saying. Well, the saying has to do with what we've done, particularly with getting to 8 billion people population. We aren't quite at 8 billion. We're somewhere in the 7 billion mark. That is sort of irrelevant. We have a lot of people on this planet, and we have stolen the resources from the future to get it there. The idea of capitalism and growth and maintaining growth so that we don't ever stagnate as a society, it only serves the society. It doesn't actually serve the people. The society where it has people on the top and people on the bottom, the people at the top are being served beautifully, excessively. The people in the middle are not so much, and the people at the bottom are not at all. They're being destroyed. We are walking into an era where food will become an issue and resources will become an issue and power. I don't know how many times I keep hearing about AI and how AI is such an issue and it might take over the world. I don't think people understand we have so much requirements for power in order to power AI, not to mention the growing heat. We are not going to run into AI taking over the world because we're going to run up power, having just simply not enough power to air condition, to cool, to keep people safe. And we're probably all going to have to live in the ground in order to survive the heat. Everybody get a basement. We're going to be needing basements and stone dwellings. This is why our multi-potentiality is so valuable, because we can see across different spaces. I was told as a child, oh, Lillian, you have to make sure that you study in this area and stop trying to do other things. Don't be drawing, just sit still and listen. That is not how I learn. My brain needs multiple things to doing in order for it to unleash my cognitive brain so it can focus on something else. I absolutely have to have more going on than just sitting and listening. That's not how my brain works. I need coloring. I need some art project. I need something so that I can learn, because I have a connector brain. All of you creative neurodivergents, you have connector brains. You see across. That is what the multi-potentiality is all about. It connects the different spaces. You are connector brains. We should be going in and cultivating the crap out of that. And yet our society is completely set up against connecting. I can't tell you how much I was yelled at for connecting really amazing things. And people are like, this isn't what you were supposed to do. It's just about you regurgitating. That is the 2D world. That is not going to serve the future. The future is the 3D world, the 3D plus. We need getting back into our spatial giftedness and cultivating that, but we don't do that. And the saddest thing is we don't actually need to go back to cultivate it. We just simply need to not uncultivate it. We need to not drive it out of children, and that's exactly what our system does. Unless your kid's in Montessori or homeschooled, your child is being pulled away from their creativity. And again, with that new smart book, they talk about a liberal arts education is the best education, and we once had it, and now we don't. This isn't the future. This was actually the past. We were there. We understood that giving kids broad understanding and theory and ideas and letting them go into many areas made them most equipped to deal with whatever life handed them. But then we got too far into the weeds and we just created a world that everybody pick a career and go into that career, and then you stay in that career doing almost the same thing over and over again. That is dead. That is not going to get you, unless you're wealthy and already have all the connections, you're not going to get very far doing that. I meet CEOs regularly with my other consulting company, and they're broken. They can't figure their way out of the place they've gotten into, and they've done everything their Harvard education has told them. They've done everything they're supposed to do, and they're in a corner. They can't see their way out of that corner. These people are incredibly educated. They're incredibly wealthy, but they cannot break out of their way of seeing and being because they're afraid, because they have been educated so much that they're stuck in a rut. They're stuck in a path that doesn't exist. They don't know how to go beyond that. You can see this in neurodiversity, especially because we aren't doing neurodiversity. Everybody who is neurodivergent is struggling, and the systems are rolling back the diversity and anything that used to help increase the diversity of our systems. That is all being rolled back at the college level, and it's also being rolled back at the corporate level. So we have all these systems out there who are rolling back diversity. They got rid of the chief diversity officer because it hasn't happened fast enough, because our focus has been so on short term and the payoff being instant. Everybody at the top is so greedy and it's all about short term profits that they don't see it happening and delivering in the short term, and they've already rolled it back. Literally, some of these people hadn't even been in a job for a year and they were rolling back the chief diversity officer role and position. That is all going to cost them so much more later. But if you have rolled out by then and you are setting up your consulting agency, you're going to be those highly paid consultants that they bring in. So if you've already set up, you're already good to go, you already know your niche, and you've already used your multi-potentiality to figure out how you're seeing and being and navigating the world is set up, you are ahead of the disaster that is going to be coming very shortly. There is a reason why we don't have a great executive functioning skills. There's a reason why we don't have all these things that they want us to have. Our brains aren't set up for that. Our brains are set up for creating. It is incredibly intense for our brains to be 3D spatial giftedness. It's incredibly intense to be creative. You are using so much more glucose. I don't know how your kids are, but my kids are sugar hounds. I was a sugar hound until I got on some stimulant. I just ate sugar all the time. I hated vegetables. It was like I needed sugar to keep my brain going. My body and brain were duking it out all the time. When I went on some stimulant medication, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, hey, My brain is not fighting my body for resources anymore. I'm able to do this and move through the world quite normal. I took care of my pots, so win on that. I sit in these groups that have people who are incredibly gifted, incredibly creative, incredibly scientific, incredibly math-oriented, incredibly amazing people, and their bodies are giving out on them because they have so much sensing that they don't know what to do with all that data. I know that just having moved from the South Florida, Miami area to another area where it's more green, it's more peaceful, my brain has suddenly so much more space to think and create and do art. And I feel like playing music again. And I was not feeling that much like doing my arts in Florida because I was exhausted all the time because there were so many people and so much going on. And I was always worried about what other people were doing and whether or not they were going to crash into me because there was an accident. I'd go by an accident like 1 million times a day in Miami. It is so much going on that you're tired, you're exhausted. And when I talk to people who have long COVID or chronic fatigue, they have many names for it, they're not that far off from my EDS. The sensory information that you have because you're such a high sensing, if it is not used, it comes back to bite you. When my brain has so much sensing information and I'm not able to process it all, I'm exhausted. We really do need to understand better how creatives move through the world, how much sensing they do, because all of the most gifted, talented, sensitive people I know are struggling. And they're going to only struggle more because the world's going to get more inputs, more chaos, more everything. And we need to protect our children and care about them and give them a cocoon that makes them feel safe so they can grow up and be creative. Because you cannot be creative when your life is on the line. You cannot be creative when you're being squeezed out of every bit of sleep and energy and fluidity of life. We've had everybody under this entirely false sense of urgency and resource scarcity, but we haven't had resource scarcity. We've actually had an abundance. Our capitalism has set it up so that we all feel like we're being pinched all the time, pinched for everything, pinched for money, pinched for this, pinched for that. That is ridiculous. We weren't being pinched, but we have created that feeling so that everybody feels scared. Everybody feels angry and scared. That's sad because we've forgotten how to be a collective. We've forgotten how to connect with each other. If you go into your multi-potentiality, if you go into needing many more teachers than you have been given, and you want to understand it, then you're starting to build community again. It really is beautiful when we go into our creativity. Our creativity helps us grow leaps and bounds. We will definitely figure everything out if we were all allowed to be creative because everybody would be able to understand them. We'd be able to share our knowledge so much easier and there would be no limits on it. Right now, there's huge limits on our knowledge that are imposed by our society. The idea that we are all meant to all be producing all the time. The idea that we are all meant to fit within average and average is the ideal. The idea that our creativity is something we actually have to create structure around is just ludicrously stupid. Your creativity is inborn. It's from childhood. And some of us never grow out of it, and we are punished every day for it in our system. And my goal is to help us find our way back so that we can be the new leaders because we have to. So in that new SMART book, they go on to say, what is creative mastery? I love this book and I highly recommend it, but I want to tell you that creative mastery you're born with. You don't need to figure it out. There's no special blend. It's just you getting to know you. Our own marginality will cause our creativity. We are pushed out of the system, and therefore we will have to create a way back in or create our new way of living outside it. This is what I'm doing. This is what I do with others every day, and it is beautiful. Every day I figure out why you like what you like, and we go into that and we figure out what that comes out to. I run into multi-potentialite people who are building something big. And I talked about my tornado of learning, how I like to put myself in that implicit learning, immersion learning, where I just build this tornado. Every day of my life is like that because I create a new podcast each week. We're not non-linear thinking. We're actually creating the whole picture. The framing is what makes it seem non-linear. Our frame is so large. Those of us who are more smaller picture, who have high multi-potentiality, but our picture is smaller, you are the people that go into the world and they learn piano pieces and they play these piano pieces perfectly. And they're like the perfect child that everybody's like, wow, they're so accomplished. If I had a brain that was a little bit smaller, I would be much more like that. But I don't have a brain that wants to master a piece of music. My brain wants to create a piece of music. So when I go and learn a piece of music, I do it, I play it, I learn it, and then what I do is I make it my own. I change it. I do not play it the way I'm supposed to. I don't want to play it the way other people play it. I want to play it the way I want to play it. I want to play it the way my voice can sing it. I want to play it the way my hands can meet the needs of my skill set. I'm not a concert pianist. I'll never be a concert pianist. I don't like to do drills. I like to play. So what I do is I learn and I create in my space. That is what creatives do. Creatives do not actually care about what the guidelines are or what the levels are. That is not something we need to worry about. What we need to do is just learn. They emphasized interdisciplinary learning. You don't need to emphasize that. You just need to let us go. We don't need to do that. Overcome social pressure. That's really easy. You pull your kid out and let him go to Montessori, or you homeschool him. Or you pull yourself out and you take a break, you travel, you figure out what you are, who you are, what you need to do. And if that is not possible, then perhaps we just reassess what your life goals are, because you are supposed to be creating. And if you're not creating, you're literally wanting to die. I know that feeling. That's how it feels. But when you create, you feel alive because you are creating. We all have this level in us that must create something new. When I started out my podcasts and when I started out on everything I've ever done, I never wanted to recreate what other people did. That seemed boring. I could easily learn that, and I usually already sort of knew it to some degree, so I wasn't really growing. I had to do this in order for me to keep growing. I had to take all the things and connections and all the places I'd been to and seen and things I've done and start making my own way of creating what I learned and found to be true. I am creating a new way of seeing the world, but it's not that I'm creating it really truly new. This is the way I see the world. My world has always been like this. I have always been able to go through the world and say, no, that doesn't apply to me. No, that doesn't apply to me. And we all should have this. And yet we don't. There's so many people who are told every day that you're wrong. There's something off with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're different. It's okay. In fact, differences are the future. Differences are what's going to make you stand out and will help you find and take all that average AI data and make it into you being your amazing, best producing self, that you're going to change the world. How do we keep going with that? Well, I've told you for children, it's pretty simple. You let children be children, you let them play, you let them grow. You don't expect them to be producing all the time, because production and creativity are counterproductive. Production is not what creativity is about. Creativity is about play. So when you ask your child, what do you want to know more about this? How can you grow you? How can we get you further and further into this? That's what you need to do. My kids have run up through the grades really, really fast because I didn't put grades on them. I have watched them just crush everything because they didn't have pressure on them. We are not meant to work in pressure. I spoke, I think last week, where I was reading this one, Stephen Fry, which I know is from Futurama. This guy is a futurist, and he is Stephen Fry, and he talks about how competing is our way. It's not our way. The highly gifted, the highly creative, we are not competitors. We steal like an artist, like that whole idea, but it's not even stealing. It's you seeing what somebody else is doing, and then you go and you take it and you make it your own. We constantly need to be around and seeing and understanding and growing from other people. We can break down what other people do and then make it our own. There is a lot of ability in the AI where we're going to now be able to create new perspectives using the average perspective to see it differently. This is what the future is about. This is what you want to cultivate your children in. This is what you want to cultivate yourself in. If you're miserable and your emotions are screaming every day, I hate this life, I don't want to do it, guess what? You're creative. Your emotions are trying to say, this isn't your space. This isn't your life. This isn't the best place for you. Let's figure it out. I meet young people every day who are brilliant, and they are depressed and they're broken and they're like, I can't see a path for me. It's okay. You're going to make your own path. You do not need to feel like you're not going to fit in the world, because there's no world to fit into. It's all breaking apart. You will be the most prepared because you never fit in. So go into that. Understand how you work your best. I only engage in group learning in my weakest areas, because that is where I have other people forcing me to push myself. It's the same thing for working out. I do not like to work out in classes, but I will do harder and push myself further if I'm in a group. Now, I hope you realize that that's why the schools are set up in groups. Everything's set up in a group so that you'll push yourself further. The problem is, though, is that I don't want to push myself further in my creative spaces. I will naturally do that if I'm allowed the space to do that. And our system is set up so that everything is like a workout class. So we're all being guilted into going longer than we would have wanted to go. There's no payoff for me in that. If I do that in a workout class, my body will actually break down because I'm so sensitive. The same thing goes for when I am in a learning environment. We are not supposed to be in group environments learning unless it's something you don't actually want to learn. So if you need to learn something about IT and you need to learn about AI and you need to go into those things and they are somewhat interesting to you, but not enough that you'll do it on your own, then you seek out classes. A gifted neurodivergent understands how to reach greatness, and that is by pushing yourself in the areas where you want to grow but don't have the gumption or the interest to do it. But this is what separates you from regular. Regular doesn't have that self-wanting to grow in any area. You have it in almost every area, but a few. So in those few areas, use the system. Everywhere else, go find it and suit yourself. We can learn so much by just sitting with a single peer. We can learn so much faster. But again, because our framing is so big, we need somebody unique and a one-on-one experience so we can ask our questions, so we can grow faster, so we can do so much less effort than the way the school system makes it do it. We are not meant to be in the system for our true gifts. It has worked for me. I got my degrees in weaker areas. It has worked really well because I don't care enough about them. It forces me to learn in those spaces. And I learn about them. I went into technology because I knew this is not something I was going to innately try to understand. I knew it was something that somebody was going to have to kind of force me into. And then once I got into it. I loved learning about it. But it is not my burning passion. I just loved because it was new and it was constantly growing and there was always things to learn. I love that in anything. I love that. That's part of multi-potentiality. It's the understanding and getting to see how it all comes together. You're already a multi-potential if you like to see how things come together. People are very proud to say I'm a multi-potentialite, but I don't really actually see any difference between being a multi-potentialite, being creative, and being neurodivergent. In fact, you could almost say neurodivergence is the exponential version of multi-potentialite and creativity and creative being. Anyone can be interested in many things, but it is the creatives who have no choice. It is the neurodivergents who have especially no choice but to be dabbling in everything, to constantly be following their intrinsic motivation because we have that super focus, because we have that special interest. Our choices are limited by our need to be a creative and our only way of being as a multi-potentialite. I think it's an exceptional thing to be a creative, neurodivergent multi-potentialite. Creativity is your innate way of being in the world. It is the ability for us to use our sensing to interpret the world and create output. If you don't use your sensing to interpret the world and you're not creating unique output, you're just recreating what other people said, you're not going to have as many emotional states. You're going to probably fit into the system just fine, and you're not going to be struggling nearly as much. There is a silver lining. I talk about those frogs in the boiling water. You can put a frog in water if it's warm, and you can heat it up to boil, and the frog will not hop out. You are not that frog. You are the frog that will hop out because your sensitivity is higher. You will not stay in there. We keep thinking that what we see for one animal applies to all of that species. That's just simply not true. There's variation in the species, and you're part of that. You are more equipped to deal with what is coming. The only way you're going to be able to do that is if you go into who you are, you go into your multi-potentiality, and you build your little tornado of understanding skills, and you go into all those things, and eventually it will come all together in something you uniquely create. This is what real giftedness is, the gift of creating a new way of seeing and being and doing. You're meant to do that. Yes, the world is not going to take it and embrace it very quickly. They're not going to be all about it. I deal with this every day. People think I'm weird. People think I'm weird because I have such clarity around the way I move through the world and the way I don't care what everybody else says about things. I have my own distinct way of seeing and knowing. So I'm interested in if you can help me get more vocabulary around it so I can explain it to others. This is what intuition is versus cognition. I told you before that my intuition is really high, but what I've really actually learned to do is make it cognitively realized. That is the most impressive thing that I've learned to do in my childhood and adulthood. I don't think learning is that amazing. I learn just hanging out. My brain takes in everything and it sorts it all out and looks for how it comes together, and then it comes up with its own theory. That is not the hard part. My hard part was actually just trusting myself that eventually everyone will understand what I'm saying. Right now, it's not 100% clear. I realize that. Explaining it is a lot. And so I'm trying to break it up in this podcast. But the clarity that I have on how I move through the world and how other people like me move through the world is really high. And if you ask me a question, I just know the answer. And it's fascinating to me that I do, because I didn't necessarily think of it until you said it. But my brain has such clarity over the patterns in there and how it all comes together and how other people are the same and different from me. It's fascinating to me. And I have definitely created my own little tornado of ways that come together. And it involves all of this art, all of this science, all of this math, all of this English, all of these humanities, all of these things, because I don't like to settle on one thing. I never have. I don't know how other people can do it. To me, it hurts me. It hurts me to settle on a single thing and have to go into that one thing. It's not how my brain's set up. There are some of neurodivergents whose brains can go very, very deep, and they have done really well in the system, but I'm not one of them. And if you're not one of them, then you and I need to get together, because we'll figure out what your true potential is, what your place in the world is, and where you're going to go. We want to start looking into how you go your own way, how you embrace unique paths, how you create them. We are so good at making the same stuff over and over, mass production, but that is not going to get us through what's coming. You cannot mass produce things for constant change. You cannot mass produce what is going to be needed when the change is coming up and it's a brand new need. We're going to have to make them as we go. I think of my husband when we're moving, we're ever doing something where we're kind of limited on our resource, he will freaking pull out a knife and whittle something down or create something or drill something or whatever. And we'll have a working way of making this thing happen because he's so innovative with things and mechanics and engineering. I can do it to a certain degree, but man, he hands down crushes me in this space. And it is fascinating to watch him figure out how to get things done, fixed, like unbroken and working and running with no resources. I mean, it is amazing. But also, it's one of the reasons I married him, because I was like, holy cow, this man will always teach me something new. It will be my life with him will be interesting and wonderful and fascinating. When I go out into the regular world, people are like, why do you have to be that way? Why can't you be normal? Why can't you not be so much? Why can't you be less than? I'm not wired that way. It's okay. I'm not wired that way. My overexcitabilities come up pretty easily. My cognition runs out because I take in so many things and I'm processing so many things. And I am moving through the world in a way that most people are not. But it has served me and it will serve you. And we need to just go into it, because you are the future. You are the new smart. And I highly recommend you get that book. I highly recommend you start understanding how you fit into the new future and how it applies to you. I think that we have to realize that our really oppressive schedule destroys our ability to be creative. It destroys our ability to play and think and understand and follow our intrinsic messages. That's on purpose. That is very much on purpose. It is with our schedule that we control people. That waking up early, that is not how creatives move through the world. Creatives like to go to bed late. It makes sense that some of us would want to go to bed late. It keeps the whole village much more calm and serene and also protected. But if the creatives are up late working and trying to figure stuff out, it's quiet. They're able to see and understand stuff. They self-identify with other creatives. The people who wake up bright and early, those people are not necessarily the creatives. My brain does not come online very quickly in the morning. It takes some time. It takes some time for me to, first hour is just a complete and utter loss. I have no idea. I have to lay everything out the night before and everything has to be prepared because I cannot actually cognitively process deeply when I first wake up. But man, when my brain comes online, I can knock out anything. I can figure anything out. I am ready to embrace that. Another thing I think we need to talk about is I just read a book and it was very fascinating. And it finally drove home somebody else talking about what I've always noticed. And that was the creative space. And in our creativity, we have all of this idea that it is mindfulness that gets us to being creative. And I totally disagree. It is not mindfulness. It is not mindlessness either. It is actually this space between where we have the creativity, where it's the two brains going back and forth. It is the sensing brain and it is the thinking brain, or your cognitive brain, going back and forth that gives you your true creativity. I don't really understand why we have this whole thing where we have to clear our brains to learn or grow or what have you. That's simply incorrect. It's not clearing of the brain. It's the connection of the two. It's them coming together. The Wired to Create book does a really great job. It's by Scott Barry Kaufman. He talks about how it isn't the mindlessness or mindfulness. It's that middle part where your brain's going back and forth. That part is the part we need to cultivate. That is your intuition. And then when you realize it fully and you have your negotiation between your sensing brain and your thinking brain, then you have it realized cognitively. Intuition tells you which way to go. I had emotions-led learning when I first started this path because my children, I realized, learned driven by their emotions. They cut through all the fat of the learning and went straight to the heart of it and learned it because I let them just sort of self-manage it. We are such amazing learners. We are so naturally wired for learning. And it makes sense. Why are we such a successful species? Because we're naturally wired for learning, because we naturally can do this all on our own. But our society strips us of half of our brain. It strips us of that emotional side and tells us, oh, that's dysfunctional. It's not. It's your spatial giftedness, and it's all of the sensing data that you have. And in order for you to survive in our world, you had to deny your spatial giftedness. You had to listen to the 2D world and regurgitate it. That time is over. If you want to be successful in the future, you're going to go into your spatial giftedness. You're going to embrace that, and you're going to be a whole new human. You're going to be this high-functioning master of your own destiny type of human. We definitely have to change how we see what creativity is. Creativity is going back to your roots, being natural, being a child, just opening it all up. We have lifted up the creatives who are really not the most creative, but actually they had the most resources to produce and get other people to run it. The whole creativity industry is kind of a farce. If you look at what has the highest money laundering, it's art, it's antiques, and it's other things that you do auctions for. That is this huge money laundering avenue. It's not actually based on a person's ability to create amazingly. And we've really, really undone the whole creative intellectualism because we only allow some people to invent, or my husband and I have run into where you go in, you start working for a company, they want you to create new ideas, new patents, whatever, you create them, and then they try to shove you out and steal the patents. This happens to us over and over again. And it's like, I finally just was like, I'm done. I can't play this fighting for the things I've made and the things I know. I'm tired of fighting people. I'm just going to go do my own thing and let people come to me. And that is what you have to do as a creative. I swear it is so hard in this world to be brilliant. It's so hard to be creative because everything is set up to steal it, to exploit it. But that is not going to be the case as we move into the future, when it's going to be kind of every man for themselves. Because if you're a creative, then you're lucky. Because if it's every man for themselves, you're going to be an easy person to survive that. The whole idea of society, the idea that we all are the same, the idea that everything is supposed to be the same is going to kill us. We cannot keep going without realizing what the individual gifts are. I talked about it last week where I said, the birds and the dogs and the cats all know when the earthquake's coming. They all know when there's some major event coming. We have one dog in our house that we call our barometer because he starts shaking every time a thunderstorm is coming. I can't feel a change in the air. Sometimes there's nothing even on the news about the weather changing or on my weather apps, and my dog is shaking, and I know that it's accurate because he's always correct. He knows when storms are coming. They can come up really, really fast, but that dog shaking is our barometer. I think of my ability to see different connections. I have always been ahead. We have so many people we have marginalized and destroyed so that they can't say, hey, we're headed towards this. I can't help but think of Gloria Steinem. When I was a kid, she was constantly talking about, women's rights. And I really didn't get it because I came from a family who didn't view women as valuable as having rights. Why is she constantly yelling about this stuff? And who is she serving? And I didn't get why she was so angry. Well, now I do. Now I understand. I am angry on her behalf, on the behalf of others like me who are oppressed, whether they're women or not, because I feel enraged by it. But it's because I'm finally in a safe place and because I finally can trust my own self. She is lucky. She got to trust herself. Everyone that is a philosopher, everyone that is a activist, everyone who's out there trying to change the world, they have gotten to a place where they're trusting themselves and they're going to fight the narrative that is regular. You don't necessarily need to do that. You don't necessarily need to fight the system. Because there is a halfway point where you just find you're healthy. If you have space to fight the system, and you can, that's great. But really, this is about you being your best self and not about you trying to change the world. I don't think I'm going to change the world. I'm going to change me. I'm going to change the people that I come in contact with, the little parts of the world that I touch, but I cannot change the entire world if I try to be an advocate for everybody's needs. I can't do it. I don't have enough energy. I don't have enough space. And my brain calculates quite simply, this is what you can do. This is the ripples you ought to do. These ripples will go to here, that will go to there. I know I'm 2 to 5 years ahead of everything that is coming. I know that people can't understand what I'm saying a lot of times. And if you can, awesome. But a lot of people will not understand me until much later on. I've gone through this my whole life, and that's what keeps me going. It keeps me going because I'm going to be ridiculed. I don't put comments on for these things because people are going to push back. But this is my multi-potentiality that's showing me to go here. It is your multi-potentiality that will show you to go somewhere else, and you will change the world in your way of changing it. You'll make those little ripples in the most calculated way that suits you so that you can be successful. Our ability to create our own path is the future. Our multi-potentiality is a huge part of that. Our spatial giftedness is the fundamental difference that drives that multi-potentiality. Our innate curiosity, our innate ability to use our sensing and our rationality to create is what drives all of this. If you have small children, and they are being beaten down mentally or emotionally or physically, they need to be allowed that space. Figure out what they're good at. Let them go into it as much as you can. For each of my children, when they were young, I figured out what they loved, and I went into it as much as I could. And as they got older, it only got bigger what they loved, and bigger what they could do, and bigger what they could make and create and think and see. I can't say enough for the fact that the only reason my kids are so healthy and so authentic and easygoing and move through the world with mental health that's really high despite really high neurodivergence is because I just never questioned what they were. I didn't ask them what was wrong with them. I didn't say, well, you have to figure this out and fit in and be something you're not. I said, well, figure out what you are and what you like and then go into it. And I just kept letting them do that. My oldest one, he went through that system. He went through that system for the most part. I've had to undo a lot of what the system taught him with him, but he has always had that counter perspective. I've always provided a counter perspective of how he was and how it wasn't really like that. And he has learned to trust himself as a result. It doesn't harm you to be in an environment that is counter to the way you run. It is not bad for you. It's only bad if you're forced to believe that you're the one that needs to change. You can go into those environments and learn a great deal. I mean, I learned an immense amount. But if I have to stay there forever, for long periods of time, if I'm stuck there, as we are in our school systems, as we are in our work culture, if I'm stuck there trying to fight what is dysfunctional about it so that I can get my stuff done, then I get exhausted. Then I get burned out. And that's the same for all of you. A lot of you are incredibly burned out. You're incredibly exhausted and you have so much potential. It's disgusting. And you have no way to tap it, to use it, to go into the world and show it. That is wrong. And we can change that. We can change that, especially right now that we're going into this period of constant change. I want to make this channel, this podcast, I'm going to go to YouTube eventually. I want to make this so that we can showcase each other. We can offer what we know to the world and become essentially a one-stop shop for neurodivergent giftedness cultivation. I can't do this all. I have big picture thinking, but I am not the only one out there. There's a whole ton of us with all this ability, and what we need is each other. So I ask that you reach out to me, even if you don't want to use my services, and join me on my podcast, because it really is important that we connect and we be our best selves and we create something amazing together. That's all for my podcast this week. I hope this was valuable. If you have any feedback or you want to add to this, please send me an email at info@giftednd.com. I will be back again with another. Take care.
The views, information, and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent Gifted ND Incorporated, Lillian Skinner, or the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast. This podcast, Lillian Skinner, and Gifted ND Incorporated are not responsible and do not verify the accuracy of the information contained in this podcast series. The primary purpose of this podcast is to inform and educate. The Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast is only available for private, non-commercial use. Any other use of the information contained within this podcast must be done with express written approval and knowledge of Lillian Skinner. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute any part of this podcast. The developer assumes no liability for this podcast or its use on any other podcast or other media.